Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Amjad, and for that warm welcome. And about my introduction, this is a opportunity which I was looking forward to for many months now. This is going to be my first lecture with IICE, so I look forward to more and more interactions going forward. So beginning the day today, I think before we get into the lecture and talk about the subject, which is putting your first employee stock option plan into action, I think let me give you a bit of introduction about myself and my company. So ESOP Direct, which I represent as a head of its business, was incorporated some 2 decades back. This was at that point in time a startup, so I can relate with all the entrepreneurs who are present in this meeting. What a journey is from the start to where they will go in future. So when we started off, ESOP was again a concept selling, because 99, 2000, or some years after that, this was more like a concept for the corporates. This was not something where you will find case studies in India. And also, we have seen companies which are more like promoter driven and founders at the helm of its management. So for us to get, as a concept going, required a lot of effort of the team or the founders, at that point in time. But we kept our steam, and today here we are as market leaders. Now, in this journey of 2 decades, we have also gone through a lot of ups and many ups and few downs by the grace of the team who has worked in this company. But overall, the experience have been very satisfying. So we have done more than consulting engagement for more than 1,200 companies so far, out of which 50% of the companies would be unlisted, and almost 90%, 80% of those companies will be funded entities. So while I speak about the subject, I just wanted to get this as the back of my message here, that I come from this experience of how unlisted companies basically look at ESOPs. And I tell you, many of these companies have associated, and we have the opportunity to work with them while they were at their young stage. So without further ado, let me get into the first slide. So I understand from the profile of the participant in this meeting, many of us have already implemented their startups. Many would be in the idea stage where they are contemplating how this idea can be further developed. And there may be many others who would be thinking about whether ESOPs, what ESOPs are, how this works, and from a knowledge standpoint. So I think the first slide actually covers or talks about the importance of ESOPs in a company, and let me spend some time on it. So as far as ESOPs are considered, one should look into what this subject is first of all. So this is a compensation element. So apart from what you can figure out in a compensation of an individual, which can be a combination of fixed salary or variable or certain perquisites which are given, so ESOPs is one of the component over there. So how this is different from the other component? So basically in ESOPs, the opportunity is to share the wealth creation in the company. So first of all, there's an opportunity. Second thing is sharing of that opportunity. And third is the wealth creation. So looking at the wealth creation part, so any business over a period of time will create value for its founders. It will create value for the investors. But whether it creates value for the employees is something which one should ask. And if it creates value, then what is the means and ways of sharing that value with the employee? So that is the idea why ESOPs got picked up. So ESOPs is equity link incentive basically. So here there are different ways of making employee a part of that wealth creation process. Also, enable employee to share that value which gets created and monetize it at a later point in time. So if you would have heard or you would have read the news in the last 6 months, 12 months period, we have seen a lot of startups making good stories. So we have seen startups which are getting listed. There are around 8-10 listings already in this financial or the last financial year. The previous year. The current financial year, we have seen in FY22 around 8-10 startups which has got listed. So basically, here it's this message is also going down in the startup community, where earlier we have seen, and I can tell this from my experience when I used to consult unlisted companies, that how this will make sense. I don't have visibility of a liquidity, but those things are going for some amount of change. So ESOPs are which were typically seen as paper money. Now we are seeing this a lot of more and more startups coming out, going for their listing, and even those startups which are unlisted yet, they have done certain liquidity events, which again has created further positives around equity-based compensation. So with this background, if we were to look at a compensation element from a ESOP standpoint, the multiples which ESOP can offer could be 300, 400%, 500%, with on top of the current CTCs or the salary of an employee, which is very attractive for him. So how this helps? This will help a company in its recruitment. Talent is in any good ecosystem, it will be a scarce commodity. So for recruitment, it's going to help you. Companies, especially the early stage companies, would have this tendency, and not only the tendency, but they will also have to preserve their cash flows. So given the controls and the money in the books, still to come in form of accruals, and investors' money, to be used with a lot of judgment. So to make it your compensation more attractive, you can have a component of ESOPs here. So that's another element which can be tried out. Retention of key team members. So while retention is a long-term objective, it gets married very well with ESOPs, because ESOPs can have a plan in place with its vesting period. I'll talk about these terms. So a long-term incentive will actually serve your company in retention, and that's where ESOPs can have a very big role to play on. Employee, if we were to see who is working for a company and he's working for just the normal monthly intake which the company provides for the services which he gives, that's one traditional way of doing it. But if we add an ownership element, obviously the motivations are higher. So that's another important area one can understand through ESOPs. Organization value creation and personal wealth creation. So personal wealth creation in a normal course with an employee, typically in a traditional mold, happens when there is there's a retirement, or when the employee sort of accumulates the savings which has been there for long term and accumulates. But when it happens, the employee economic life is more or less over. So in a traditional structures where the employee retires and the personal wealth creation is limited to the savings which is accumulated, but then those savings would be used. So it will be used in different ways, but then in case of ESOPs, this will happen pretty early. So there are opportunities for you entrepreneurs to create further set of entrepreneurs, and which has happened in many cases in the past, where entrepreneurs have become entrepreneurs because of their ESOP values. So this is again something which needs a highlight. It helps you in raising fund. So today, if you go to a VC or an institutional funding, they will ask about, or they will want to know what type of team you have. So basically, whether those skill sets are which is to be required to grow this company, scale this business is available or not. So from that perspective, it helps in having incentive mechanism which can retain those skill set for a longer time. It's something which also excites the institutional fund houses. And when you go for your funding rounds, you will find that it will be a mention in your term sheets. Now, this is a factor to influence your growth. So ESOPs can have conditions on its vesting. So by having those conditions, one can set milestones, certain KPIs, which can be at org level or at individual levels, which further drives the efficiency when it comes to behavior on the employee side. So these are there would be obviously many, but these are some of the important points which I pick up, from a ESOPs beginning. I mean, if we were to contemplate a thought process around ESOPs, these are the points which will drive you, to that discussion. Now, moving to the next slide, I think this is slightly theoretical in nature, but from your knowledge, I think it was relevant to put this slide in this presentation. So when we say ESOPs as a term is a generic term. It's we expand it. We say employee stock option program. The moment you say employee stock option program, someone would say, what is a RSU and how does this differentiate from ESOP? So RSU is restricted stock unit. There may be a term like stock appreciation right, which you would hear when you read material around ESOP, or you will hear about employee share purchase program, or some term like shadow option or phantom units will come your way when you start in deliberating this subject much deeper. So the way to address this concept is it is equity linked incentive. That is the term one should use. There are two branches to it. One is dilutive and the other one is cash settled. So when I say equity linked incentive, it has to do something with equity. So it's both interlinking with equity and interlocking. So here, when I say equity settled, which means that we will be either issuing equity or transferring equity to the recipient. And these are some of the instruments which are identified over there. So ESOPs are basically options. These are derivative instruments where there's a right given to an employee or to that participant in the plan to buy equity of the company at a future date at a predetermined price which is fixed today, subject to fulfillment of certain conditions, which we call as vesting condition. So just leaving that definition apart and the jargon and phrases, it is basically right to buy equity in the company. That is the primary underlining thing here. It is the right to buy equity of the company, and the prices is determined upfront. So ESOPs here, it's a right, but your prices are fixed basis what is the market price at the time of the grant. So in case of any business, a market price has to be discovered, and the basis that the prices are the strike price, which is the price at which these options are committed, are given. Similarly, we have SARs. So in case of an SAR, the employee gets the difference in terms of the two valuations between these two periods, and the basis that difference, the equity is issued. So this is another way of implementing equity link incentive. Then there is state stock units where options are granted at deep discount. So basically discount from the market price or even at face value. So here the employee risk is minimal because he actually participates in the equity at the same price at which the founders come in. And then there are employee share purchase schemes where the award of shares happen upfront. The equity is issued to the recipient or the employee. There is no planning as such. Planning in a sense, there is no 3 years, 4 years to it. The employee receives equity upfront. And then again, there is a round, the employee will get that equity whenever the company or the board decides for it. So basically in all these instruments, the common link or the thread is that there is issue or transfer of equity from the company or one of the shareholders or the investors or the founders there. The other branch is cash settle. So here there is no dilution of equity. These are actually the instrument will derive its value from the underlying share price over a period of time, and the company will pay it from its own books. So there is a cash payment by way of bonus. So this is just like it's simplest to administer. Just like, suppose my share price today is 100, and after 2 years when it turns 500, I pay my employee the difference of it, 400, and this is from my book. There is no real issuance or transfer of equity in this case. So we have these instruments which are available for the company to deliberate and see whether one can make sense or a combination. Typically for an unlisted company, early stage companies, we should not be exotic. We should try to look at one simple instrument for implementation. You will get more opportunities to discover other instrument as you go along. In case of early stage companies, ESOPs are given typically at face values or deep discounts. As and when you raise institutional rounds, after that, it will sort of gear towards the market price concepts. So the early ESOPs in any companies are the most beneficial and for the employee. And this makes also sense from the point of view because the early employees also takes the maximum risk. So this is where I just want to leave you with this structures or these instruments which are available. And I thought that this is relevant to talk about. Now, moving to the next slide, I think we should know what these terms are. These are terms which are commonly used in ESOP schemes or equity linked incentive schemes. And one should have the information or the knowledge about what these terms means. So grant is a right which is given to an employee to buy equity at a future date. The quantum is finalized. The price is also determined. So that way, grant is a right which is given, but that right is not crystallized. So the next term, what you read there is vesting, which is where the right get crystallized, which means that the terms and conditions for this grant has been fulfilled by the employee, which means now the right is crystallized, and that vesting as an event happens over the vesting period, which can be any period, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year. It can be monthly also. It can be as any period we can contemplate. So during that vesting period, according to the vesting percentages which have been defined. So first year maybe 10% of whatever is granted will vest. Second year 20%, third year 30%, fourth year 40%, or this can be aggregated on a simple average like 25% every year, or this can be like a 1 year cliff 25%, and then there is monthly vesting for the remaining 36 months. So that way one can structure it. The conditions of vestings are determined upfront, and this may be again time conditions. So the vesting period in fact also relates to the condition on the time side. There can be other conditions also, which can be performance condition or a market condition where can be part of your grants here. Once we move from grants to concepts of vesting period, percentages, the important concept there is price. So exercise price is known through different phrases. It's exercise price. It is also known as strike price or grant price. So basically this is the price which the employee will have to pay to the company for receiving that allotment. This is a predetermined price, as we have seen in the earlier phraseology of grants and where the prices was predetermined. So basically this is the predetermined price which the employee will have to pay when he is exercising those options. Now the exercise can happen anytime during the exercise period, which is starts from the date of vesting typically. And if these options are not exercised during the exercise period, it will lapse. Liquidity event is the event where the employee monetizes or gets an opportunity to monetize that option. So this can be IPO of a company where the company stocks are listed and the employee will get an opportunity to sell it. Or this can be a third party who's willing to who's willing to buy, your shares from an employee. So that could be another opportunity, or a fund, when they are investing in, they can also, buy equity from ESOP. So liquidity events can be, defined. It can be, set up in your scheme. It can be prioritized. So this is a very important part of any ESOP scheme for an unlisted company. And one should have a careful deliberation around it, how they should work out. These days, we see a lot of unlisted companies coming out with their liquidity event, even if these companies, they don't go for listing. So listing, actually, I mean, listing on a stock exchange, so IPO or offer for sale. So their liquidity events are specified in a way, whether, who's going to buy, what period, what price. So it comes with some detailing in the scheme document, which the employee also finds is attractive. Then we have a scheme document. So this is basically the set of documents which is represented through a ESOP scheme. This ESOP scheme is a document which will talk about the clauses of the scheme, the definitions, what will happen in case of change of control, what will happen in case of separation of an employee, what are the responsibilities of the board, what are the obligations of the employees in this case. So it's an enabling document which allows company to issue grants whenever it feels to do it, or according to the situations. Similarly, a scheme document is not just the isolated document. There is approval process for enabling ESOP scheme in the company. So basically the shareholder resolution, the board resolution, the explanatory notes to it is also part of it. So compliance from a implementation standpoint is governed by Companies Act. And when we are setting up a company, we'll have to ensure that we fulfill that compliance, because until unless the compliances are taken care of, any verbal promise or any written promise or mention on joining letters will not have legal validity to it. So as a company, under the Companies Act, we'll have to comply with the process of having this scheme, having those resolutions properly approved and in place. The other element of the documentation, which is very important, is the grant letter. So all these documents, whether the scheme or resolution, will not mention the individual terms and conditions. So those gets described in a grant letter. So this is the individual document which a company will send to its employee, and this document will be different for different employees. And this is where the terms and conditions or any detailing, for example, difference in quantum of grants or variance in pricing of these options, or for that matter, any price or any terms and conditions which are materially different will be specified over here. So these are the terms which you will hear when you read about ESOPs or you hear about ESOPs. So I think this would help you in next time when you are talking or when you are hearing those lectures, will help you understand what these terms actually mean. So in this slide, let us, with the knowledge we have gained so far, let us see how stock options work. So I have a timeline where I'll try to capture the life cycle of an ESOP. So the first stage is the grant, where the employees is identified and they are issued the options and terms and conditions, strike price, etc., has been stated, covered over there. Let's say the example is this grant will have 3 vesting to it, and these are all equal vesting. So this will vest in the next 3 years with a 33% vesting every year. After the first vesting, as I said, that the employee has the opportunity to exercise their option, and assuming that this is within the exercise period, the employee exercise the option. At the time of exercise of option, the employee also has to discharge a tax liability, because this is treated as perquisite in the hands of the employees and they will have to pay tax on it. So whereas the tax, how this is calculated and all, I think will be too detailed for this session. But just to explain you the concept, this is basically the spread. So the value which is determined at the time of exercise of the company less the strike price is his gain, on which he has to pay tax. It is treated as the salaries income. Then, assuming that the liquidity event happens in 2024, the employee exercised the balance two vestings which has happened. He pays the purgatory tax, and on the event when he is monetizing his option, there is again one more tax component, which is capital gains tax component. So here the employee will have to pay capital gains tax depending on the period of holding. So for equity, also for that matter, let's step back what a capital gains tax is. So a capital gains tax arises when we transfer or sell a capital asset, and securities or shares are considered as capital asset. So there, if you are transferring a capital asset, which happens, as you can see on this slide, when there's a liquidity event, the employee will have to discharge a tax on the capital gains which arises here. So just like if you were to sell our house or property, there is a capital gains component which will have to discharge tax. Similarly, when we are selling our shares or stocks, we have to discharge capital gains on it. So what we have learned here through this exercise is we have seen how the life cycle of a stock options or equity link incentive works out to be. So there are basically four major stages. Grant is the first stage, vesting is the second stage, exercise is the third stage, and the selling of these options are the fourth stage or the final stage. So these are the life stages from granting to monetization, which will happen in a ESOP program or a scheme, and the employee will have to, or the company will have to go through it. At the time of exercise, there is the first taxation liability, which is in the nature of salaries, and the employer or the company would also have to deduct TDS here because this is salaries income. And there is second composition of tax, which happens at the time of selling, which is capital gains, which the employee will have to discharge it on its own. So I hope this will give you a sense about what are the life stages, and to a certain extent understanding of the taxation of ESOPs in the hands of the employees, and also a bit of a responsibility which is there on the company. Okay, so moving to the next slide, which is what I've seen the concept, I've seen the stages, I know the terms, what all it needs to implement my first stock option scheme, which is the topic or the subject, the underline here for this lecture. So we need to identify the eligible employees. So whether we want to cover everyone in the company or we want to give it to few is a decision. So as far as company flexibility is considered, you can give it to all, or you can give it to select, or you can give it to people who should be covered in the ESOP program. There is no limitation on the numbers or on the levels. What is limited is it should be given to only permanent employees of the company, or to its holding, or to its subsidiary. Promoters are not allowed for ESOPs as far as the regulations are considered. However, if you are a registered startup and under the Startup India initiative, DP IIT is the body where one can register a startup. So if we are registered startup, then we can grant ESOPs even to a promoter from incorporation up to 10 years. So this is available for registered startup who can grant it to promoters. Otherwise, it can only be given to eligible employees. The second major step there is how much I need to set aside as a pool. So coming back to the principle, so if you look at your cap table means your shareholding structure. Let's say you are the two founders in the company and both of you have 50% each. That is your founder split. Now, you want to set aside ESOP in the company. So what it means is that you will have to set aside equity for it. So it's a reserve in the shareholding which you have to set aside. So suppose you set aside 10% in the company for employees, and this you will use in the next 2 years. So what will happen is now, as founders, you have come down, each one of you will come down to 45. So in this case, 45% for each founder and 10% for ESOP. So it is important whether we should keep 10% or we should keep 2% or we should have to keep 15%. So that is the determination of the pool size. Now this we'll talk about in the next slide. What are some of the factors through which we decide the pool? So it is the most important part in any initial discussion for ESOP as to how much pool we need to set aside. Then selection of instrument. So though there are multiple instruments which are available, but typically for early stage companies, startups, it is advisable that they select one of the instruments here and go for it. Selection of too many instruments, having too many schemes to work upon may create administrative hassles, and that might also not be required from a business standpoint. And even the employee would not appreciate too many instruments, which will sort of creates differences in understanding. We'll have to get a valuation done from a registered valuer. So basically this is where we will have to sort of create this or get this valuation from a valuer. A registered valuer is a person who has a license from the respective authority to do valuations of financial assets. Shares are one of them. So we'll have to get a valuation done to estimate what is the price of the underlying share. And basis that we can decide the strike price of an option. The next step is we'll have to fix the strike price, define coverage, vesting schedule, conditions, exercise restrictions, what will happen in case of separations, exits, and also liquidity events. So this is basically defining the term sheet of a ESOP program, so that this can be further detailed out in a document, your scheme document, your letter, and can be rolled out. Finally, the approval process of having the scheme document in place, getting those resolutions approved, making a grant to the employee, and doing a communication so that they understand what was the purpose and how this ESOP scheme works. So basically, these are the major steps one can see to while we have to set up a program, we'll have to go through all these stages. Now, as I said, setting up the option equity pool in the cap table is a major decision point along with others. So how do we set up this pool, and what is that percentage? And you are going to hear that more and more when you read any content or you go to raise your institutional rounds. You will get that as a discussion point with your investors as to how much pool should we need to set aside, because this will mean dilution, and the dilution is something which any investor or shareholders will guard properly. So there are two approaches. One is the top-down approach. So when we say how large the pool size should be, we can look at what kind of a startup. So most of the startup, as far as this meeting is considered, are technology startups. So the skill set required for a technology startups will be higher. So which means that requirement for retention and the other startups, the competition there would be high. So from a relative standpoint, the percentage required for a tech startup would be higher as compared to a non-tech startup. What is the founder skill set? So founder skill set means that how much founders are, from a skill standpoint, they stand. So their orientation towards the business, have they got their concepts on? Has this concept been developed to a certain stage where this can be now the commercially exploited, or the founders have come out with the initial idea, and this will require further brainstorming and efforts to develop it to reach a commercialization stage. So what is the founder skill set? So basically, if the founder skill set is high, I mean they are tech, or they have the experience of the central idea behind their venture, I think then you will need a lesser amount of pool as compared to if the founders have an idea, but then it will require more effort in terms of developing it up, where you will need a skill set from outside. Hiring needs. So again, this depends upon whether you will need experienced people or you will need juniors who can run it. So it depends upon your hiring needs. It depends upon your geography positioning. It also depends upon your, again, from a skill set, whether these are technology or business. So accordingly, your pool size can vary. what is the team size? So are we looking at a larger team size to run this business, or this would be, a small team size? Typically, team size which are larger in nature will have a larger pool requirement as compared to team size which are lower in that need. And talent pool. So basically, where I am, operating my business, what is the availability of the talent pool? So in case if the talent pool is scarce in that geography, obviously I'll need to give more options to, attract talent from market, and that will require a larger, pool. So this along with investor term sheet. So investors, they will also put up a number as far as ESOP creations is considered. So, that will have a bearing on how much pool needs to be set aside here. So this is the top-down approach. There is a bottoms-up approach here where we look at from a company standpoint. So we define the coverage, whether we want to do broad-based or selective. Accordingly, if we have more people to cover in the company, we'll need a larger pool. Estimate valuations. So we not only estimate the valuations of today's, but we also estimate, what will be the future valuations, and accordingly derive a value on it. Assessing the criticality. So not all will be of the same criticality. So there will be employees in the company. Some of them will be high, some of them will be medium, and there could be category which is low. So basis the criticality, your individual awards will vary, which means that your pool size can vary, depending upon how do you assess that situation. What is going to be the potential benefit? So basically, these are the multiples one needs to apply. So when we say, the employee should be able to make 5x of the CTC in its ESOP program, or 2x of the CTC, that is basically talking about the potential benefit. So if an employee is earning 10 lakh rupees, and he has to earn, be from ESOPs 50 lakh rupees, that is a 5x benefit we are talking about. So along with that, grant frequency, whether we are granting yearly or we are granting once, and then we are not going to make grants during the vesting period, and how much strike price we set up will have a bearing on your pool. And this is where one on the left hand side, this is the top down, and the left on the right hand side, this is the bottom up. So basically, this infographic also shows you that there has to be a balance in it. Don't go too much from the individual side, or just look at some data points and implement it in your company. There's a sweet spot somewhere in between, which will help you set a right pool for the organization. Once the pool is set up, then comes what kinds of grants you will be making. So this pool can be used for making hiring grants, which is when you are hiring a person in the company, you will make grants on joining, and these are typically made to in cases where negotiations on cash components are done. So hiring grants can be made. Retention grants are basically time based. So over a period of time, this will vest. So it's a part of the LTIP of the company. Then we have performance grants. So basically grants which are basis the performance of an employee after it has been appraised, or before the year itself, when the appraisal process. So at the beginning of it, you make those grants, define the KPIs and the conditions basis which the options best. Along with that, top up grants and promotion grants. So basically, top up grants is going forward, you want to top up a star performer with more grants, so you can do a top up there. Or if you raise further equity and your along with other shareholder, your ESOP also get diluted. Then promotion grants. Basically, if there is a level up, for an employee, so one level to the next level, some component of promotion grants can also happen. So the idea of showing you this slide was to make you understand that sizing of the pool is something which has to be taken care of. The deliberations have to be done, and what kinds of grants can be made from that pool over a period of time. So a pool is sized up for a certain period. So it is not that you just look at your current requirement and you size up that pool. You look at your future requirements as well, and accordingly you size up that pool and go to the investors or shareholders for that approval process. Okay. Now coming to the regulations or the compliance part of it, I'll not go much in the details. I think we can read it, in a separate when we have time, going through it. But just to emphasize on the regulations is that this is one of the major problem. In fact, I've seen with early stage or startups that promises are made on stock options, or even as I was saying earlier, sometimes some numbers are denoted or some percentage are stated in the joining letters or onboarding letters, and which is not backed by proper compliance. So one has to be, the founders have to be very careful as to, first of all, what you are communicating to employees. There's a compliance process under Companies Act, and then ongoing process of compliance for accounting of these options, and for that matter taxation, because this is the responsibility of the company. So nowhere in this you will see that it's that the company is not involved. So whether this is when you are implementing the program, we'll have to see that the entire sectorial process of ensuring the resolutions are approved, the scheme is properly drafted, the letters are drafted and communicated, is considered. On an ongoing basis, the company will have to comply with the Indian GAAP. So the accounting is done properly, because this has cost implication on the P&L. If you don't do it, later on, this will come as a huge shock. So, accounting of option. Taxation has a responsibility on the company, because as a company, you will have a withholding requirement of deducting TDS and all. So the point is, one needs to get advised, with the competent people who can guide you through this, process of compliance. It's not that it's my equity and I give it, that way. The processes are there. So it's for the company to ensure that there is no non-compliance, because non-compliance costs are much higher as compared to costs which you will incur for its compliance. So this is where I just want to leave you, with this slide for a minute, so that you can go through. Yeah. So the next part of my discussion would be on some of the industry best practices, what we see. So now we have, if you were to summarize what we have done so far. So we have went through the importance of stock options. What is the principles or the rationale behind the company looking to implement stock option program? What are the terms which are used in a stock option program? We have also seen a life stage of our stock options and that timeline, and we have seen that grant vesting exercise, and then the finally sell. We have also went through what are the requirements in terms of implementing a stock option program. So we have seen identification of employees, setting up that pool, selection of instrument, getting a valuation done, what will be the terms pertaining to strike price, vesting condition, term, exit route, others. And then we also have seen the compliances. We have gone through in some details as to what the company needs to do in terms of when it's to decide the ESOP pool for it. So and along with that, we have seen what are the regulations pertaining to Companies Act, income tax and accounting. So now in this part of the session, let's go through what are the industry best practices. So these are this is based on the data survey we have got while we asked certain questions to unlisted companies, and this survey was participated by more than 50%, 50 companies. So when we asked this, the first question was about the coverage. So as we know, the choice is to give everyone or to select. When we ask about the coverage part of it, the response which we got was that they covered only 10% of their employees. So the answer, we should not just take it as the 10% the others have done, so we should be doing 10% in our company. That's not the case. The case is these companies may have, 5 years, 6 years, though they are still unlisted, and initially they may have done more or less. So when we are talking about these data points, we should look at it in some relation. So when we have asked this question, the survey respondents say to us that around mostly this was around 10%, but still there are 14% companies or 14% of the responses where they have said 51%. So though the inclination is towards limited coverage, but there are also companies who are doing certain amount of broad-based. When we ask question about grant frequency as to whether you are granting annually or you are granting one-off grants and or you are granting some other basis. So the response which we got from the majority of the participants was that the grant frequency was annual, which means that they were granting on an annual basis. So what, again, the relation we can draw here is it's like a year appraisal where along with CTC cycles and payroll cycles where increments happen, this was also made part of it. So this is what we can see from the coverage and the frequency standard. When we ask question about the instrument, so most of these companies stated that they have done only ESOP, whereas there were companies who have done multiple instruments, but their numbers were limited. On the ESOP pools side of it, greater than if you look at the percentage terms, 5% ESOP pool was something which most of these companies came with their response. However, there have been companies which are between 5 to 10%, and also companies with more than 10% equity pool. When we spoke about the vesting period in our previous slide, and we can relate it here, that the 4-year vesting period is something which is fairly common with companies. So 4 years is the preference. In my experience also, I've seen unlisted companies program having vesting period which is 4 and 4 years plus. So 3 to 5 years is something like a range. 3 years are basically you will find in listed entities, but unlisted entities it is 4 years and plus. In case of vesting type, equal vesting is something which most of these companies try. This is pretty simple, so that could be one of the reasons why they have preferred it. So equated vesting schedules are something which are quite popular. When we ask about whether your vesting conditions are time-based, performance-based, or a mix of both, so the response we have seen is the trend is that time-based vestings are something which is above in terms of responses as compared to performance-based or a mix of time and performance. However, I still feel that early stage companies where the risk is quite high, not only on the founders and investors, but also the early risk takers are the employees. So, time-based vesting is something which one can start with, and then you can, as you graduate and scale up, you can bring in the performance elements. Whether we do it, the strike price is at market price or discount to market price, this is one good question. So, over a period, if you look at market price, is something which takes the head, but there are companies who are giving at face values and also to discount to market price. So if you if you see 54% is market price and discount to market price will be 46%. So it's like an even game over there. And one should, as a company, one should look at the consequences of discounting, the accounting element into it, and how this is going to impact the P&L. This will has impact on your dilution as well. So exercise price will have many sub-level discussions pertaining to cost and also to dilution, which one needs to deliberate while deciding the strike price or the exercise price. So on the liquidity event, when we asked that whether the exercise was linked to a liquidity event or there was a fixed exercise period, I think there's a significant majority who's saying that it was linked to a liquidity event. So basically what it means is that during the period when the company was closely held or privately held, there was no exercise allowed. So employees were not allowed to become shareholder, though have the commitments and options. Nobody is taking their commitment of on options, but the exercise was linked to a liquidity event. This is done to safeguard minority shareholding concerns, which are categorized in covenants in your scheme document. So that was from a liquidity standpoint. Then I think this is the last point. Yeah, whether the trust route or direct route. So when we asked this question, most of the companies followed the direct route. So basically, trust route. In case of a trust route, the company implements a trust which act as a intermediary between the employer, the company, and the employee. So the administration happens to the trust. Whereas in case of a direct route, as the word itself speaks out, the company and the employee directly engage with each other. So this is the end slide of my presentation. So just to summarize here, from a stock options is a very integral part of your long-term incentive planning for the employees. And as an entrepreneur, you will need to develop your team, get the right team members to start with, who needs to be incentivized, because as I said, they are not less as risk takers as you are. So they need to be incentivized with how they participate in the value creation, and going forward, a long-term incentive program for the team who joins later on. So the stock options for a early stage company or a startup is as integral as any other decision, whether this is pertaining to your product stack or to your technology or to your pivots or scales which you may have in your future. So this strategy should be there in the first place, and should be part of your plan, overall plan in terms of the people strategy. So I'll take a pause here. If there are any question and time permits, we can take it up, or else you can write to me. I'll share my credentials with you. You can write to me, and we can take it offline.
Thanks, Jalaj, for a very exciting talk. I think that's very helpful. Udeep, are you going to take questions? Is there a formal? Is there a method that we are going to follow? Like, do you have questions in chat box, or should we start asking?
Yeah, so I think we advised participants to have the questions in the chat box. But I guess it's time for the questions, so people can unmute and ask question. And so if there are questions, I think participants can unmute and they may ask questions.
So let me start with the first question. Jalaj, so I wanted to know that when we decide to, or when we start a company, let's say, and there is 100% equity shares which are again divided among founders and other people who are stakeholders in the company. So is it you mentioned that it is mandatory to have, let's say, certain percentage, for example 10% ESOP and then 90% ownership? Is that how it works, or ESOP can also be part of that 100% pool, and later on the company decide that okay, they are issuing ESOP? Do they need to do that in the beginning, or it's a flexibility?
Yeah, so as far as the mandate is considered, nobody is mandating you to have a ESOP from day one. That is not the mandate you will find it anywhere. So, but strictly, if you look at from a commercial lens or from a strategy lens, one should have a ESOP program. However, the real need for ESOP program comes up when you go to raise funding from a VC or PE, basically the institutional round. So basically the price round, which happens. So at that point in time, your VCs or PEs will tell you, certain numbers, and the numbers in a sense, how much percentage needs to be set aside. Okay. These numbers are all pre-money, so they are not going to participate in that dilution. So basically, this is meant for the employees who have joined the company and before they step in, and also some component will go to employees who will join after them. So if I were to answer that question in the context of pool size, so the question is one, the timing and how much. So as far as the timing is considered, the moment you start hiring your people or your initial team who are like founding team members, not promoters per se in a strict sense, but they are just like you in terms of because they also commit their effort and willing to take that early risk. So promises are made, commitments are given, but these are not formalized most of the times. So it is suggested that if you are making a commitment, it should be reflected on paper. The argument against doing ESOPs early is that the business model is still untested. We don't know whether this will go to that pivot stage or whether this product itself will see the light of the day or not. So that could be the counter to it, that even if I have hired my founding team, I will not do ESOP until unless I have a vision of getting this through. So my suggestion there is that if there is a reasonable certainty, even if you have not raised any institutional round, you should be able to implement your ESOP program, set aside that pool, because that gives further confidence to your founding team members that they have some equity component in the company. And it might also happen. It might also happen that they have come from well-established, careers and joining your startup. So it is good to give them equity stake. Equity stake, I mean, is ESOPs in the company. And when we are giving ESOPs, then it should be formalized. So if you are doing it, then this will be like a reserve which will get created. So in that example, the two founders in that example will come down from 50% to 45%, and 10% will be reserved. Now, out of that 10%, you use 2%, which means that the committed percent of that 10% is 2%, whereas 8% is still available. So that is one scenario. If you don't do ESOPs and you have your team and founding team with some employees, who have added, and after 12, 15 months, you are going for institutional raise, there you would go, they will, as I said, I mean, for a VC or a PE, this will be one of the terms you will find in the term sheet. They will say that put some percentage for ESOP, and this will be pre-money. So typically, a institutional round will have this as a requirement, whereas before an institutional round happens, it is up to you. And my suggestion would be that if you are employing people and you are reasonably sure and confident about the next step, you should implement your.
Okay. That's a good advice. Another related question, which you very rightly mentioned, let's say the two founders own 50% of the company, then 10% they are putting aside for the ESOP, right? And then only 2% is allocated. At that point of time, what happened to that 8%? Because someone has to own that share, right? Or can we leave it just like that? Okay, to be allocated later. I don't think.
Yeah, so that 8% will be covered in your cap table. When the investor will come in, he will say that this 8% I will consider it as a fully diluted, in my fully diluted issued base. So they will consider the entire 10%, not just the 2%.
Okay. No, but at some point of time, or at any point of time, a company shares should be owned by someone. Like there should be 100% ownership, right?
So these are notional.
Okay.
These are, so on the equity side of it, when you see your members register, it will still be two founders who are holding 50% each. So let's say 100 equity is there, they will be still holding 50-50 each. But now you have issued ESOPs, or you have committed ESOPs, which is 10%. So your fully diluted base is like 110, whereas your member register will only show two individuals holding 50 shares each. So it is, the real equity will still be 100, whereas this 10% is a notional pool which gets created.
Okay.
So from a
excellent.
valuation standpoint, when somebody as an investor will come in to invest in your company, he will consider that this 10% is already issued.
Okay. And also, like, for example, if employee get options and then they stick to the company for a couple of years. Now, let's say company went public and then started doing well. They also started issuing bonus shares on the main shares. So does ESOP also qualify for bonus shares? Do they grow?
So, yeah, so as far as ESOPs are considered, if you do any corporate action in the nature of bonus, which is going to benefit the other shareholders, but whereas ESOPs, these are just options in the hands of the option holder, they will be adjusted. Okay, so the benefit which the other shareholders will get, that benefit will also get passed to the option holders. If those option holders have become shareholders by virtue of exercising, then they will get bonus shares just like any other shareholders. ESOP shares are common class equity shares. They will be treated at par with other shareholders of the same class.
Okay, so it has to be exercised. They just have the option to buy. Is that right?
Yeah, so there are two states. Either they are option holders or they have converted their options into equity. Let's say I received 10 options in this company and I have exercised 5 options. So I have now become a shareholder for those 5 shares, where I still had 5 options which are vested with me. Now there is a bonus. And in that bonus issue, there's a 1:1 bonus issue. So what will happen? I will receive 5 shares against my shares which I have, I'm owning in lieu of exercising my options. So I will receive 5 shares. But what about my option? I need to adjust it. So those 5 options will become 10 options.
Okay. And let's say an employee who works for a company for 5 years, didn't exercise, it's not expired, still it's valid. So can he also transfer those ESOPs to another employee for a value?
No, so it is not allowed. So transferring of employee stock options is not allowed. In only certain circumstances, which is unfortunate demise of the employee, or in case of a permanent incapacity of the employee, this can go to the legal heirs.
Okay.
As an employee, I cannot hypothecate it or pledge it for, or provide it as a security for any loan or something.
Thank you. Those are very insightful answers.
So I have a couple of questions, sir. So firstly, I would like to know that is ESOP a part of CTC? And then the second question I have is related to what Dr. Amjad was asking, that let's say that there are some of the ESOPs which are not given to the employees, they are left there. So how they will be taxed? So how will be there, how those leftover ESOPs will be taxed? So these are my 2 questions.
No, so come again on the second question on the tax side.
If there is a startup and there are some of the ESOPs that they have given it to the employees and some of the ESOPs are left. So the leftover ESOPs, how are they going to be taxed? Like, will be a tax on the founder, or who is going to, how it is going to be taxed?
Yeah, so your first question was whether ESOP is a part of CTC. And so the answer is yes, it's a part of your CTC, but then what value you will show in the CTC if it is a part of it, because it's a future derivative instrument. We don't know or show what is the value of it. So typically it is represented as the numbers in terms of units which are granted over there without a value. The value can be, quite misleading in this case, because value can get derived from the future share price, which nobody knows today. Okay, so from a concept standpoint, yes, this is part of a CTC. Even the Companies Act recognize ESOPs as a form of managerial remuneration. So it gets incorporated there. But then when it comes to the disclosure element, value is very difficult to be stated over there. So that is one. Second is when you say that what happens to ESOPs which are left in reserves, I construe that way. These are unallocated, unused. What happens to them? It lies over there because taxation is on the individual who is getting benefited of it. Now, ESOPs which are there in reserves, nobody is getting benefited out of it. It is there in the reserve. It's like an enabling pool which the company has to make a future grant. And that grant can happen from the pool. But nobody, until unless a grant has happened to an individual gets benefited out of it, there is no taxation consequences.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think these were my questions. So is there any other questions? We have maybe some time, or actually we are running out a little bit, but let's see. If there is any other question, you can unmute yourself. I guess if there will be more questions, we can ask you there. I would like to thank Mr. Jalaj to generously accept the invitation for giving a talk that I believe will enlighten young entrepreneurs about the importance of employee stock option or ESOP in a startup. It was a very interesting talk. And once again, thank you, sir. I would also like to thank Dr. Amjad Hussain, IICE Innovation Fellows, IICE team, and IISER Bhopal to organize and be a part of this wonderful event. Also, I would like to thank all the participants. No event is possible to be successful without the participation of the participants. And I would also like to invite all of you for our upcoming webinar on next Friday at 12 o'clock. And you can subscribe to us to our YouTube channel to keep updated. And you can also follow us on Twitter at IICE, IISER, IISER, and LinkedIn. Thank you all. See you next Friday at 12 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. And my good wishes for your venture. All of you, my good wishes, and also to IICE and Amjad and Udeep, all the team over there, for the work you are doing for the startup ecosystem. All the best to you. Thank you so much.